Awesome. Well, more folks are going to funnel in. We got a first group of people here, so I want to make sure we're kicking things off. So maybe to start off with some intros and the session. So today we're going to be talking about all things onboarding in CS, talking about playbooks, building repeatable processes, how to do it, building teams, best practices, all that great stuff. We're joined by two experts here, multi-time high growth startup CS and onboarding specialists. So really excited to learn from their trials and tribulations. Yeah, we'll dig right in. So maybe as quick intro. So I'm Ross, CEO and co-founder of Accord that's putting on this event. And we're joined by Tyler Chapman and Brandon Ramsey. Tyler, the CS lead at TruePlan, and Brandon, head of CS at OnSiteIQ. So maybe I'll pass the mic over to you, Brandon, to do a quick intro, and the same with you, Tyler, and then we can dig right into the questions.
Yeah, so I mean, first off, Ross, thanks to you and the Accord team for putting this on. This is super cool to be able to do this and kind of spotlight CS. I know Tyler, I'm sure, can relate to this. You know, it often feels like CS doesn't get enough of the spotlight, and for us, this is a super cool opportunity. So Brandon Ramsey, like Ross said, head of customer success at OnSiteIQ. We are a construction intelligence platform driven by AI. Essentially, we go through and document major construction projects by sending out data collectors in the field. They'll walk the entire job site, and then they'll load up that data in our platform, and our AI will go through and kind of label items, identify schedule deviations. It's very, very cool. I've been working in prop tech for 5 years now. My previous job was also at a prop tech company, and you know, I'm able to kind of see the night and day difference between what tools like Accord are able to do for a business versus what life is like without them. So this is an awesome opportunity for me. Yeah, I'm excited to be jumping into it, but Tyler, I'll flip it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. +1 to everything you said. Thank you so much, Ross and Accord team, for having us. So I'm the CS lead at TruePlan, which is a headcount management platform. It is what we do is we integrate with a company's HR system and their applicant tracking system to provide a single source of truth for the company and help them manage their hiring plan. I've been at TruePlan since July, and prior to that, I was in customer success and then CS ops at Zendesk, and I was on the partner success team at ClassPass prior to that. So lots of different approaches to customer success, but as Brandon said, I'm really excited to be here talking about it because I do feel like it can sometimes be the unsung hero of a company. But hopefully we'll change that.
That's right.
Totally. It was funny gearing up for this, as you know, as I mentioned, end of quarter, we're an early stage startup and looking at, you know, how we make sure we feel 100% about making our number, and where are those key deals coming from? The 80% of that gap is likely to come from our current customers. And I think it's one of those things that's tough because it's something you really need to set your team up for success, excuse the pun, like ahead of time, right? It's not the thing that you can turn on. It's not like, hey, we're going to send a bunch more emails. We're going to, you know, spend this money on paid ads. It's something that is very process oriented. And you need to set yourself up for success months in advance, and maybe even longer, with like the hiring, making sure you're the right people to have those conversations, invest the right amount of time, all that kind of stuff. And also from a product perspective, I think is one of the least invested in roles, because you know, have all these conversations, top of funnel conversations, one-to-one, get them in the product, and you're not learning really what's going to unlock that next set of growth for you. So really excited to dig in and learn a bit more from the experts here. So maybe a good place to start. What does it mean to have an onboarding and success playbook? Why is it required for a winning go-to-market strategy? And kind of thirdly, maybe we can touch on this if we have time on this question. What's really do you think about a difference between really onboarding and success? Is it one thing to you? Is it the same? So maybe we'll start with Tyler. What does it mean to have an onboarding and success playbook to you?
Yeah, so for us at TruePlan, we use our Accord playbook almost not exclusively for onboarding, but really, really heavily during the onboarding process. As I think, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but we are also a startup. Our company is super young, and we are very much in the mindset of everyone wears a million hats. So we needed a place where we could log and document every step of the onboarding process, and then hand it to someone who didn't have a huge background in implementation or in onboarding, and then they could just take it and run with it. Mm-hmm. And we have found Accord to be such a great place to do that, because we get feedback from customers in real time about what's working, what's not working. my teammate Catherine and I, so we are the CS team at TruePlan. Neither one of us came from an implementation background. And so we also knew that we were going to need to keep track of every single learning we had and make sure that we could continue to iterate on it. And I think it's
Do you think there's a big difference in there after, you mentioned you came from both CS ops and CS background? Do you find there's a huge difference in the relationship and the skills that you need to have and process between onboarding and long-term success? Or love to get your sense on that, because I'm just still learning about this kind of stuff myself.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way that I think about it, onboarding is so tactically crucial to the customer's long-term success. Whereas I feel like once you get all the pieces right in that process and that phase is over, then you can really dig into the relationship part of it. Of course, you're building a relationship during implementation as well, but it's super important in that specific stage to understand the customer's workflows, how they're measuring success, what brought them to your company and to your product. And I think once you nail all of that down and you communicate to the customer that you understand where they're coming from and you're going to meet them where they're at, then you can really get into like long-term success, which is really grounded in relationship building and relationship management, in my opinion.
Totally. So not necessarily totally different skill sets, but maybe a bit more tactical with the onboarding and a bit more strategic and relationship building on the success side.
Totally.
Awesome. Before I pass it off to you, sorry, to Brandon, why do you think it's important to have like something that's written down based on your experience? I'm sure you've been at organizations or on teams where it's like, hey, go do this. Here's the account. You have that meeting with the AE that closed it. You're like, go off and, chat with them. What do you find the difference is now that, and it sounds like you're already pretty ops minded if you had that role before? What do you think the difference is there that you've seen between teams?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with documentation. Like no one loves processes more than I do. I'm super meticulous about everything. And so I find, especially coming into a space where I'm not 100% familiar and confident in my skills, at least to start, if we can keep track of every single thing that works and every single thing that doesn't, it's impossible to not be constantly improving, I think. And again, as the team grows, we can hand it off to someone who maybe isn't as familiar as well, and they can just get the hang of it pretty quickly. But also, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but we also do work internally with a lot of stakeholders. And so as we meet with customers and as we get their feedback during this process and they're writing things down in their Accord, we're writing things down, we can go straight to our stakeholders and say, here is everything you need to know about what we need in order to move this forward.
Totally. No, that makes sense. I like the point, and we try to do this too. Because like even if you're not, 10 years in, you have 100 million ARR and you figured out what works, at least having a guess and an assumption to be able to look back on after that call, after that quarter, after that, won or lost or whatever. Hey, we didn't see the adoption we wanted on this, or this was, what do we do? And what are we going to do next? And just learning even faster, it helps to write that thing down and commit that to, pen to paper, document online. Awesome. So similar question, Brandon, anything to add plus one, or, maybe you think differently about of, what it means to have an onboarding and success playbook and why it's required to win as a team?
I'm trying to think of a better way to put it than Tyler, but she kind of hit the nail on the head. Ultimately for us, what really matters to us is consistency. Consistency to me is more important than perfection. If we can get a consistent program down, then we can start improving the process, but we have to identify what are our consistent steps. So Accord and playbooks, that we drive out of Accord give us that consistency. It's a repeatable process. And of course, we're going to tweak it along the way and make it better for everybody involved. I think my favorite thing about, kind of mutual success plans is the shock factor that the customer has whenever they first get insight into it. They're like, so you're just going to explain to us every single step that you're going to take, and we're going to be able to follow along. And when we say, yeah, that's pretty much the case, they're going, wow, this is kind of unheard of. And in construction technology, or what we call prop tech, it's especially unheard of. There is a lot of chaos that goes into implementing a new system or a tool. And there's so many teams and stakeholders that you have to engage. And so by having that mutual action plan called out and just understanding, hey, this is how we're going to drive success for you. And ultimately, this is how we're going to get you to that ROI that you're looking for. Because at the end of the day, everybody is buying our tools to get an ROI. They're spending money so they can make money in the long run. So if we can get them all on the same path, walking forward step by step, it eliminates the chaos and ultimately make sure that our customers trust us from day one. A quote that I have, I live by is Warren Buffett said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation. It takes 5 minutes to destroy one. A mutual action plan and a playbook makes sure that the reputation stays intact, no matter what. What they bought is what they're going to get, and what they get is value immediately. So, no, I mean, ultimately for us, it's just having that consistency. We'll worry about perfection in the D and the C and the E round and maybe at the IPO stage. Right now, we need something that works every time. So the playbooks help tremendously with that.
Totally. It's so interesting. I mean, even as y'all are talking, and like I again, I come from a sales background, dig into CS and onboarding at Accord as well as through our product. And my mind is just honestly constantly blown about like how little investment is made in such an important thing. Like, right, you think about marketing, top of funnel, you're building audience, you're building your brand, you're spending all this money, all this time, blah, 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 just to get people to understand what you're doing. You have those sales conversations, you look at the conversion from MQL to SQL to opportunity to close. Then you have these people that you've spent so much time, money, resources, et cetera. How are you not doing everything possible to make them incredibly successful, become best friends with everyone, all this kind of stuff? Because you're always, you're looking at your number, you're looking at, ARR growing. And in the short term, it's kind of what we talked about at the beginning, it seems like less of a lever. But as we're coming up against end of quarter, where our largest opportunities and the people that we spent the most time with before and made successful, and probably would have even more if we invested more there earlier. So I think it's really interesting to think about. And I think it's changing, not as much as I'd imagine, though. I think there are, a good portion of the startup world, maybe it's like 20% of folks that are believers like myself recently. But yeah, it is surprising that people still think about it as like, as we did very early on, is like, oh, we'll have the AEs do this thing. And it's like, well, they're thinking about the next conversation, booking the next meeting and prospecting. They're not necessarily, iterating on this playbook so everyone across the team can learn. And you really need that dedicated person that, is very process driven like y'all, to think about building out that playbook for your team and growing from. But here, let's make sure we're going to switch back and forth from our questions in the audience. So as a reminder, again, please put your questions in the Q&A or just in the sidebar there in the chat. We got a great one here. What materials, documentation are usually included in the onboarding playbook? Mostly enterprise onboarding. Great question. Anyone want to jump in here?
I probably have a little bit of conflicting ideas around this. I don't put a whole lot of collateral in the playbooks, specifically because there's a set point in time that you want customers to receive that collateral. And if they get it too early, they're disincentivized to show up to the trainings and the calls that we need them to show up on.
Yeah, or overwhelmed. I think we sometimes send people too many things, and yeah.
And what we'll do to displace that is we'll add an action item to share out where it falls in my court. We'll have a Google Drive link that we can drop down and distribute out to a group of people. So, in terms of documentation for us, there's a much more extensive answer because our operations team has to kick in and there's a lot that goes into the data collection process. So I want to save that for another talking point, but, training material documentation. Yeah, I typically will not share that until later in the playbook.
Yeah. And what about you, Tyler? What materials documentation usually included, and how do you, balance the line of sharing a ton, but also like not overwhelming people during the process?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually feel a little bit the opposite of Brandon on this point. The way that we do onboarding at TruePlan, we sort of just lay out all of our cards from the very beginning. So when we have our kickoff call with the customer, we go through the timeline and tasks and responsibilities for implementation. And then we say, right after this call, we're going to invite you to this platform called Accord. In Accord, you'll be able to see every single step required for us to get you from here to there. And there are some resources that we share later on. So for example, when we do our trainings, we record the sessions, and then afterward, we'll add those resources to the Accord. We'll share guides and links to our help center and things like that. But from the jump, we start talking about change management. We have a link to a change management like ADCAR guide that we find really helpful. We have templates and things like that that we share with the customer from day one. And I think for us, I find with implementation, and actually just in general with customer stuff, I think there can be a little bit of a hesitancy to ask customers for things you need from them and to be really upfront about their responsibilities in our mutual success. And so I find that saying from the beginning, like, listen, this is going to take us a month. There's some things that I'm going to do for you. There's some things that I'm going to need you to do for me. Everything is in this platform. You can find all of it here. I find getting ahead of it is, it helps us move quickly. And I also think it helps with just like accountability and trust and honesty and relationship building.
Totally. Very tactical question here that came up the other day. I think it's very important, especially in those first 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, to be having that live communication, right? Like it's not just emails back and forth. It's all the best practices in line their team, especially if there's end users on their side that need to adopt this product. How do you think about setting those expectations to make sure you get that face time? And what do you think about the ideal cadences there?
Do you want me to answer first, Brandon? Yeah, okay.
I'd love to hear yours first. Give me a second.
Yeah, sure. So specific to us, to TruePlan, we try to do onboarding pretty quickly. We try to get customers live within a month, if not sooner. And usually when we have new customers, they've just come out of a headcount planning process and they don't like it. And so they're like, all right, we want to move quickly. We want to fix this for the next time. So there is always a level of urgency there. And we have to say to them up front, in order for us to do this as quickly as you want us to, we have to hold each other accountable. We owe each other certain things. We have to be responsible for what we own. So for us, we meet weekly, if not twice a week during that month-long period. I'm also a big fan of over communication. I think with us, we've also found, we learned kind of early on, there are places during implementation where momentum is at risk of fading. And so we've made some changes to our playbook actually to make sure that we get ahead of that risk and we ensure that the cadence continues, the customer stays excited and stays engaged. And then I also find the ownership piece of Accord. So when you can assign a stakeholder or an owner to a step, that's nice because then I'm not the one reminding the customer they owe me something. I can just assign them to a step and they get a message from Accord, which is nice.
For sure. Yeah, so my answer is going to be a little bit more complicated, unfortunately. So because we have this extensive, in construction technology, you kick off the services at the same time the project kicks off. So a lot of times customers will buy our services or our product 6 months, 8 months before they even need it. And so, it naturally introduces this lull in the conversation where they've bought it. Now we have to keep them engaged, keep delivering the material around, hey, when you do get access, this is what you can expect. But ultimately, we have to kick things off as momentum has naturally kind of died off. And so it's really important for us to make sure we're staying on our timing and staying engaged with the customer. The way our deals are set up is that, we go from closed one to kicking off a conversation with our amazing operations team, who ultimately is scoping out these job sites. They're sending out data collectors, scheduling, they're getting all of that organized for us. And then it's only upon a certain date that the project has broken ground that we can actually go back to the customer and say, hey, here's what you bought, and here's where you're going to get value.
That's tough.
So for us. Yeah, it's insane. And what's great about Accord is it allows us to engage all the stakeholders. Our sales team, our operations team, our finance team, and customer success are all getting prompted and triggered out of the playbook. And so for us, it's really, really nicely fit a mold or a kind of a missing piece that we didn't have for that coordination across multiple departments. But yeah, there is no magic trick for us to keep our customers engaged. It's just, because we're project by project at this stage, we're handling things as they go live.
Totally. I think even a learning just from hearing that is I think we kind of set like, hey, once we go live, we'll meet with the leadership team, sales leadership team, once a month, sometimes twice a month for the first quarter. And then we do quarterly business reviews. I think, maybe even asking like, hey, might seem like overkill. Let's look at for the first week, twice a week, we can cancel a meeting or make it 10 minutes or something like that. But making sure, especially if people are looking to adopting a new tool, right? It's not just the decision maker. You're on the same team. You have the exact same goal. They just made this decision. They feel the same way. Making sure that time to value is as quick as possible. And that's when the psych level is highest. I think that's even a good takeaway for us from this conversation. Hopefully folks out there are thinking about this as well. Another question from the audience, loving these, please keep these coming. At what stage do folks start implementing these playbooks? I think this is a great question because I consistently hear this. It's hilarious from both stage companies. I hear this from seed Series A stage companies. I even hear this from later stage hypergrowth companies. Either we're growing too fast, we're building this team out, we still need to figure it out, or we're too early, blah, blah, blah. When do you think is the right stage to build this out? Tyler, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, I heard recently that it is never too soon to start documenting things. And as I said, I'm a sucker for stuff like this, but I just feel like if you're building something from the ground up, having that repeatable motion and having something that you can reference and iterate on and make improvements to as you go and as you grow is so foundational to everything. So I think the first thing I did when I started at TruePlan was make a success playbook. And then I was introduced to Accord and we built our onboarding playbook. So I don't think it's ever too soon. You can always change it. That's sort of my stance.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, consistency, like I said earlier, that's so important. The sooner you can start to build consistency, the better it's going to be for you in the long run. Consistency has never really hurt any CSM in their deal cycle with the customer. So, like Tyler, the first thing I did was build a workflow document. What do I want our customer's journey to be? And then we modeled the playbook after that workflow document, right? So it's never too early to implement playbooks. I will say it can be too early to engage certain parties in playbooks. You kind of want to grow with the playbook, get an understanding of where people fit in. You don't want to throw everybody in at once and create 1,500 steps, but to adopt a playbook early on, it's very important to drive that consistency.
Totally. It's a funny, just kind of a connection made in my head. It reminds me a lot of people feeling like it's too early to launch a product or a startup, when you see like a lot of sometimes first-time founders or earlier companies be like, no, we need to get this right, we need to get this right. And just I think more experienced CS leaders at startups lead with the process and the playbook and iterate on it. Same thing on the sales side. And I think it's the people that are afraid of, they're not at perfection yet, right? And I think the leaders out there that understand that you're never going to start in the best place, but you're only going to get those learnings from actually testing it out instead of continuing to do ad hoc things. That's the place where you're going to get to success. So great learnings there. Let's switch it back to one of my favorite questions for this session, and then we'll get back to the audience here. But what do most CS leaders get wrong when it comes to building out their processes? I don't know if you spend a lot of time with fellow CS leaders or have seen this at past organizations that you've been like, oh, I wish we did it differently. But what do you feel like is kind of either a common misconception or a common process that people build out that doesn't really work?
Personally, CS leaders, we're only just now starting to identify each other and get to know each other and start to communicate this stuff. So opportunities like this, like I said, is super cool. I've gotten to see the benefit of previous company versus current company. And the previous company, fortunately and unfortunately, I was the CS leader there as well. But the difference was, kind of the backing of the executive team of going, hey, you do what you need to do to get us consistent, or to get us a repeatable process and drive the implementation. And when you don't have that buy-in from an executive level, it really makes the entire implementation and onboarding process exponentially harder, because you're having to take it on with tools that are not meant to track this kind of stuff. It's a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of Word docs, and that's it, right? So when you start talking about a company that doesn't get it versus a company that gets it, you're really going to get your customers to value immediately, where the other one, the alternative, is dragging that process out over long periods of time, because it takes a lot more effort to get organized for that customer. Even with the templates that you have, it's not, like I said, it's not a consistent playbook. It's not a repeatable process. So what most CS leaders do wrong is not push their executive team hard enough to build this, in my opinion. And I bring that up as a fault of my own, because in my old organization, I don't think I pushed hard enough to show the importance of what customer success can offer the company. Unfortunately, I've got a great team behind me now at my new organization, and they've been very supportive in this stuff. So it does make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's what I hear a lot about, is like our team doesn't even necessarily even agree with this being an important part of the business. And like, I think a lot of people talk about this commonly in marketing and in CS, right? Is like, yes, they know we need to have these functions, but they're not necessarily as strategic as we'd hope. So yeah, I agree. That's kind of a missed opportunity. But Tyler, what are your thoughts? What do you see folks not necessarily getting right when it comes to CS teams?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brandon said. I think executive buy-in is so crucial. Another thing specifically to the CS function that I think is incredibly important is making sure that the playbook and the processes are powered by the CSMs themselves. So I have worked at companies in the past where management or even the leaders of the CS teams are not the ones that are actually communicating with customers. And it becomes really difficult as an IC to get their advice, ask for help, bring them into customer calls because they're just a little bit too removed from the conversations that you're having. And often at those companies, those are the people that are actually building the playbooks. And so I think, I'm not sure that this is, it feels presumptuous to say this is a big mistake that people are making, but I think for me, the biggest takeaway is the playbooks and processes should be built by the CSMs themselves. And as Brandon said, I don't think they should ever be considered perfect or done. I think that we should have the mindset that these things are always going to be evolving because we're always going to be learning and always making changes.
Totally. It's funny because we do like playbook building, onboarding as part of Accord's onboarding process. And we've very quickly found that the playbook from sales leadership and operations looks incredibly different than the sales or CS playbook made by the top CSM or rep. And it's very often neither on the same page, even when it's a smaller team. Like we're talking about like, maybe 5 reps or 5 CSMs and a small leadership team, and the outputs will look very different. I think it's important for them to have that shared understanding. And I think this is, when it comes to hiring, and I don't know if I'll have time to talk about the hiring portion of it, but finding people, especially in the early stages, who are not just willing, but excited to be hands-on and to do these deals again. I think the right CS and sales leaders are the people that love the art of working with customers and building out these processes. It's not just about forecasts and playbooks and internal meetings. It's really about like, what are we trying to get done together? And they're excited about helping others do that and scaling that. So I think that's kind of a key component of what people might get wrong is getting too far away from the customer.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Looks like we might have one other question here. Sorry. We have a question on how you keep the playbook agile and change as the process changes. Hard when you're so busy, especially high growth startups, right? You're like, hey, when are we going to step back and spend the few hours doing this and regrouping as a team and taking out the learnings? We usually look at a quarterly cadence if nothing else is on fire. And sometimes, hey, we're going to jump back in because something's wrong. But how do you make sure you build the time to both be doing way too many things with customers as well as pull in those learnings to those playbooks?
Brandon, you take this one first.
Okay, yeah, sure. To your point, Ross, it's when do you find time to be able to make these adjustments? I think there are certain points in the playbook that are obviously not working, and you can quickly remove those or change those and get the flow down pat. You obviously don't want a whole lot of back and forth. You want to build kind of consistency of responsibility throughout the playbook, depending on who you're implementing ultimately. But to that point, setting up a monthly review of, hey, how do we feel like these playbooks are working? What's not working? Let's just tackle it 15 minutes, call out the items that you find to be stress points, and we'll figure out as a team how we can move forward from there. It's just a healthy exercise. We do that with every process internally. What's not working? What can we change? How quickly can we change it? But just that willingness to sit down, even if it's only 10, 15 minutes, can make all the difference in the world for the next customer.
Yeah, I think we need to get better at that because, you get so caught up in the day-to-day that, sometimes just carving out that extra time and sharing those learnings is helpful. But Tyler, what's been your experience there?
So for us, I've been really lucky. As I said before, I've one teammate on my CS team. So we're in constant communication, and it's almost like one of us talks to a customer and then we tell the other one how it went. And so for us, those changes are really easy to make in real time. Thinking about our process and how it's changed since July, I think we've pretty much figured out all the big rocks and we've made those changes. Those sorts of things would happen during like a weekly CS meeting where we would say, hey, we've got to address this issue that's come up. But like a small change, for example, we actually started talking about how to drive more engagement and more adoption toward the end of implementation and really getting the customer to commit to some kind of a goal, some kind of an engagement goal before we set them live into the wild.
Yeah.
And so just over Slack, my teammate Catherine and I were talking about this, and I was like, well, what if we just put on our go live step of our Accord, talk to the customer about setting these two very specific goals? And she was like, great, let's do it. And so those sorts of small things are fairly easy for us to do swiftly. Another thing that's been really awesome is the fact that Accord is so collaborative and customers can add their own steps. It's really nice to look back after we have gone through an implementation with a customer, look at what they've added, the questions that they've asked, and really identify what we can do differently for our next customer to either close that gap, provide more information, whatever it is, just based on that feedback we've gotten from an actual customer.
Totally. I mean, that's, yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, to that point, that was probably the biggest shock that I had is forgetting that customers could add steps. And when they did, I was like, I don't remember this point in the playbook. But it brought up something where I was like, man, like if the customer can pick this up, they're really showing that they care about the process and that they want to include a step. That's huge. But that definitely shocked me the first time I saw that.
For sure. I think you brought up, Tyler, something important I think has to do with CS and related to this next question. Aaron dropped about the CS AE handoff. I think we talk a lot about the handoff from AE to CS, but not a lot about the learnings from CS to AE. And I think it's hard because they're two different teams. Yes, there's two different parts of the relationship, but like everyone's trying to, do the same thing, is drive the customer to value on the product or platform and see them become successful and solve the problems that they reached out to and spend the time in the first place. I think there's a lot of learnings that come up during the onboarding and success process that don't get brought back to sales. For example, that's the perfect example of like, hey, if we're not talking about clear success criteria, the start and end of every single call, if that's not how we're framing it, that's coming up at the end, like that's something that needs to come up. Like, hey, so what do you like to see? Okay, we had this terrible, in the TruePlan case, we had this terrible planning headcount thing. People were on different pages, blah, 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 got done at the end and we didn't realize we had these 3 roles and we didn't budget them, all this kind of stuff. Like, you're pointing, you're talking about engagement using the product. Like that should, to me, that's like, if I'm the sales leader, I'm taking that learning and being like, hey, we're bringing this to CS and we don't even have a clear usage goal or whatever goal there. Like that's crazy to me. That's completely tied to like what we should be selling on and sold throughout the process and brought up at every, weekly sync or, twice a week sync and the quarterly business reviews. Hey, you're looking to accomplish this. This is how we're measuring it together. And I think that communication back is super, super important. And without, a platform, you don't really get the documentation. Like you can't look back and say, okay, this is what happened. That was in a random Slack or email or mentioned on a Zoom call. And you're not gonna be able to iterate quickly. And, 2 weeks later, be able to accomplish that. It's going to be a year later. You're talking about this postmortem, or maybe that person leaves and you don't get that learning. So I think that's super key. But curious to get your thoughts on, I think one of the most commonly asked questions around CS and the collaboration with sales is both the right way to do these handoffs, but also where does the relationship transition? I know there's a huge argument for, and during my tenure at Stripe, even working mid-market and enterprise deals, I pretty much held on to the account the entire time and did the upsells and did onboarding and CS and all that great stuff, partner with other folks. At Accord, we're doing a handoff from like trying to do a quick land and let our product speak for it and be more product led, and then pass it over to CS for expansion and upsell. Curious to get y'all's thoughts on that process and, kind of what you've learned to be the ideal, kind of handoff and touch point there. So Tyler, kick it off to you.
Sure. So at our stage of growth at TruePlan, our handoff from sales to CS happens basically as soon as the contract is signed. We have not yet brought sales back in for renewal or upsell or anything like that. I think my vision for our company once we're bigger is that will start to happen. I really do like the idea of CS being almost exclusively relationship and strategic driven. I have worked at companies in the past where CS was also responsible for upselling, and I have mixed feelings about it. But just because of how small we are, it's just natural that it would almost be weird for the salesperson to come back in a year later and be like,
that's how I
talk
feel
about
about
money.
A small company. It's like, like so many relationships for like, especially if it's not like, a plus 100, 200K deal.
Totally. And I also feel like, I've gotten feedback from leadership at my team that when they work with other vendors, the continuous handoff from person to person is exhausting, and you're repeating yourself constantly, and it's just not a great experience. And so just being so customer driven, I think we want to make that I don't know, life cycle for them, I guess, a TruePlan as easy as it could possibly be. So to make a long story short, our handoff happens as soon as the deal is signed, and then CS basically runs with the relationship for the duration. And today is responsible for renewal and upsell. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I share the same sentiment, right? From the moment that the deal is closed, in my eyes, it should go immediately to being managed by the customer success manager. Now, we did not have that luxury, kind of early on in our company's history where, we had to engage operations. They had to get involved in the process. The deal gets closed. Now we need to understand the blueprint of the project, how many square feet, yada, yada. So there's a lot that we have to take in there, and our operations team has to be involved. Now, again, with the luxury that, a playbook like Accord can offer us, is our operations team can now step back into the background. We get those data points from the customer by them answering those questions themselves, and then that's instantly communicated to our operations team. When it comes to handing off from AE to the CS, oftentimes AEs are perceived as hunters and CS is perceived as gatherers, and that's totally fine by me. But what we need to be clear on, and this is, I think, something the industry is gonna have to change a little bit to adapt for. Hunters typically don't go back to the thing that they killed, right? Typically they feed on that, they move on to the next kill, and that's where they're best suited is hunting. For us, it should be on us to gather. Once the customer's landed, it's on us to make sure that we are extracting as much value out of the customer and helping them realize their potential, to where renewals and expansions are kind of automatic. If the customer's getting value, there's not going to be a need for an AE type to come back into the fold, especially when you have things in modern day SaaS like a deal desk, where you don't really need someone to negotiate the deal anymore. For me, it's that trust within an organization that the sales team knows that we're going to take care of the customer. We're going to make sure that once you land them, we'll expand them for you. The way it's comped out, to be honest with you, everybody should be comped out appropriately at the exit, right? So if we're all playing along, everybody's a winner. So that's the kind of philosophy that we go by, is there has to be that relationship of trust between the sales and the CS person. Otherwise, they're going to constantly be trying to resell into the same organization, and that's not good for anybody.
Totally. And I think it also comes down a lot, obviously to your product and the type of organization you're selling into. But I typically feel similarly, unless it's like a very different type of deal, like the upsell into a different organization, and the CS person, no matter how much value you're bringing them, like it's kind of a totally different land type or expand type opportunity. But yeah, where you're driving that core value from that core product and it can grow pretty organically. I love your point about, and we talk about a lot about this at Accord, is it should be an organic conversation. You shouldn't be like, oh, the renewal's coming up. It should be like, hey, our regular cadence of working with this company around how things are going and, what's going on internally that's related to our initiative and all that kind of stuff. Like, it shouldn't be any different. Maybe it's an opportunity to step back, bring in, some other folks who hopefully you've been keeping up to date with the progress, either CC'd or just, sharing notes and follow-ups from those business reviews or touch points. But I think that's the world, and it reflects the way that people are buying today and paying for software. Right before it was like, hey, we're going to pay 2-3 years for this thing. Okay, then you have a big conversation later. If they're paying, every month, they're getting value out of daily. It should be kind of that daily, weekly, monthly conversation. So totally agree with that.
And to that end, if the QBRs are done correctly, you're showing the customer where they're getting value from the platform consistently, to where that last QBR of the year before the renewal, they've seen this value consistently put in front of them. For them, it's a no-brainer, reason to re-sign the deal, right? They know they're getting, 4 or 5x what they're spending on the product as a return. It should be easy enough that way.
Totally. Tyler, any thoughts on that?
No, I think you said it all.
Awesome. Cool. Let's see, any other kind of final things to touch on. Well, I mean, I learned a ton. I'm going to go back to our team and write down a few notes, and learned a lot from this session. So appreciate you sharing everything that you've picked up, Tyler and Brandon, from your teams. Maybe before we jump off, the best way to get in touch if anyone wanted to pick your brains, or maybe looking for new opportunities on the CS or onboarding side of things. Tyler, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah. My TruePlan email is super easy. It's tyler@trueplan.io. Please email me if you have any questions or need anything, or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And Brandon?
Yeah. So like Tyler's, Brandon at OnSiteIQ.io is how you can get a hold of me. Please add me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to jump on a call or join a chat. This kind of stuff is what really gets us people out of bed in the morning. So this is super fun, and I'd love to do this for anybody. We are hiring in CS, so if you are interested in applying for those jobs, feel free to jump on our website OnSiteIQ.io or send me your resume directly at my email. We're hiring CS ops as well as CSMs, so please shoot. We are hungry for talent, and if you're attending this call, chances are you're exactly who we're looking for. So.
Totally. Well, yeah, appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to share some of your learnings. Again, I learned a ton. Hopefully the folks out there did as well, and they're checking out this recording after. And thank you for all the questions, panelists. Some great ones today. And yeah, we'll see you at the next masterclass.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks Ross. Thanks, Brandon. Bye.
Thanks, Tom.